Jane Fonda said at the SAG Awards this year, if you've ever watched a documentary and wondered what you would do, this is your moment.
Yeah.
And I feel that way a lot with historical romance, where, I write historical romance that is pretty progressive, and I certainly read a lot of historical romance that is progressive. And always these characters seem to have more courage and face bigger obstacles than I've ever had to face.
Yeah.
But, and I think that's one of the roles of fiction is to put you in a heightened position. I hope not to have to face something like hiding in an attic.
Right.
But for all the historical romance readers out there who love that type of story, I invite you to think about how can you pull inspiration from these characters or from the real life historical people like Richard Carlisle. I read his memoirs, if you can call them that. His daughter published his like
His
journals and
diaries
letters.
and yeah.
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 I read that just at the start of this year, and like he was cheerfully going to prison for printing seditious materials. And he was
Yeah.
like,
And his
yeah. And when
bookstore
I get
stayed
out, I'm
open
going
and
to
he
print
was writing.
again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And he was writing to the women who were keeping the bookshop open in his absence. And yeah, there was a whole thing.
Yeah. He was like, this isn't shutting me down. This is funny. I'm going to keep going. And so I've been trying to think about that when I feel discouraged. I'm like, but Richard Carlisle was in prison and he wasn't discouraged. So,
Even like there's so many stories about this kind of thing. Like if you look at things like the French Resistance, there's so many hideous stories out of the French Resistance, but there's also Mary Burchell, a romance author who wrote Harlequins. She wrote wonderful, sweet little Harlequins about the fashion industry in Paris. And one of the things she did with her money was she and her sister, who were big opera fans, they would travel to Germany in the 1930s and they would be put into contact with various Jewish families and they would accept, things like jewelry and small treasures and movables. And they were posing as, well, we're these wealthy British opera fans who don't trust the servants, so we carry all our jewelry with us. And so they wouldn't get searched at the border. And they would take
mm,
all of these valuables back to England, meet up with the families who weren't permitted to take anything of value out of the country, and give them back to the families. So they had like both heirlooms and something valuable to start with in a new life in exile. So then it made it possible for people to leave Germany who wouldn't otherwise have gotten out. And she saved like 1,000 people's lives doing this.
wow.
There was a Polish countess. Well, she wasn't a countess. That's the whole point. There was a Polish mathematician. When the Nazis took over, she forged identity documents and posed as a countess to help save the lives of people in the camps. And there's
Wow.
just so many different opportunities. And it doesn't all have to be big, flashy, showy, like, let's make believe I'm a countess stuff, although that is the fun stuff to read about. But
Yeah.
it's things like supporting a book at your local library. It's things like showing up to an author event. It's things like letting your neighbors know where you stand, and it's letting the people in your community know that you support the existence of people who are different. And it's very practical and it's on the ground and you can do a lot right where you are. It's standing up at a local library and telling your neighbors this book deserves to be on this shelf.
Yes, absolutely. And that moment when you first start speaking up can feel very scary.
Yes.
And that's where you can draw courage from these larger than life stories and say,
Yeah.
well, I'm going to learn how to speak up. I think if you are listening to this podcast, you're a reader. And I think any reader can relate to wanting to read something.
Yes.
And it who's going to tell you not to read it? Like that's so unfair. Everyone should be able to read what they want to read.
Yeah, and like if you haven't been to a protest, go to a protest, meet some people, wave a sign. It's very easy. You can stay just for an hour if you want. It's very pleasant when the weather's nice.
Yes.
You could organize a read-in somewhere at a local park or at a library where everybody brings a book and just sits in silence and reads. Like there's so many different options. You could plan a protest party and have a great time dancing. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be dour, angry marching and violence and threats. That's not what it's about. You can stand the side of the road with a sign and ask people to honk if they support, queer books.
Right.
And
Or you
people
can
will
go,
honk, and it's great.
yeah, and you can write letters to your school board, you can write letters
Yep.
to your library board.
Letters to the editor of your local newspaper. That's a big thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So For authors, you are more than welcome to join Authors Against Book Bans, authors and illustrators. For readers, there are a lot of different organizations. One that I recommend is Every Library.
Yes.
They're very focused on supporting local organizations, so they will let you know if something's going on in your community. And
Hmm.
they also share their wins, which I have really loved. In this year alone, we have seen a lot of scary ban legislation go
Yeah.
up in different states, and we've also seen it get shut down because readers and community members have said, no, that's not acceptable. That's not what we want.
Yeah. If you follow Authors Against Book Bans, even if you're not an author, if you follow Authors Against Book Bans on Instagram, Blue Sky, a lot of those social medias will have location specific and state specific information. So when there's action, then you can like find a short little script and a guide for what to do, and it makes it really easy and it makes it low key. And you don't have to sit here and feel bad about things as a form of activism. You make a phone call to a senator to support your public libraries. You make a phone call to your local representative. You send a letter to your local library. And then great, you've done your protest for the day and you can go and sit in the garden and read, say, a KJ Charles books about an obscene bookstore.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Are there any other points about book bans that you wanted to make before we wrap up?
One of the other things that I want to say is buy in print when you can.
Hmm.
One of the things that we know is when books are starting to get banned, it's easiest to go after the electronic editions and to pull things from Access. That's the easiest way to pull the plug on those. But they're not going to come into every house and take every print copy unless things get much, much worse than they are. Buying in print is the best way to support authors. It's the best way to support libraries, well, and publishers, and just do what you can. And if you can't afford to buy all the books you want, because who of us can, then you can spread the word on social media, post about what you're reading, what you're enjoying about it, support your library events. If your library is doing a drag story hour, absolutely show up to support them there. Check out local queer authors speaking in various bookstores around town. Just go sit in the audience and hear a book talk.
Yes, yeah. And the more you read, the more you know. So
Exactly.
try picking up those banned books if you hear that they're banned and see what you learn.
Yeah.
What are they afraid of you learning from these books?
Yeah, because they're not doing this because we have no power, is the thing to remember. They're doing this because it's powerful. They're doing this because what these books have to say is important and meaningful and honestly fun. A
Yeah.
lot of these books, like the Supreme Court book that I cited earlier, was called Pride Puppy, and it's adorable. It's about a dog who gets lost at a pride parade and they have to find him. And
Mm.
it's so cute and it's so sweet, and everybody's in their best like pride costumes. There's a lovely drag queen who helps the puppy, and it's just darling and joyous. And
Yeah.
you look at it and what are they afraid of in joy? Why does joy scare them so much?